All right, now it says the broadcast is live. That's what I was looking for when it was said live. Okay, well, welcome, everybody. It's been a while. I am coming to you from Taiwan, Taipei over here, but today we have a very special guest. It is none other than Larissa Williams, a longtime beta hobbyist and also a very, has been a judge, has also been in the California Beta Society. I'm sure you are gonna tell us a little bit about your background, but looking from your bio, it is very experienced, and we're today gonna be learning a lot about betas, which are, by the way, one of the more popular fish that gets brought to our auction. So I'm really looking forward to this talk. Take it away, Larissa. Thank you so much. Tell us a little bit about yourself. How'd you get into all of this?
Hi, Jerry. Welcome to everybody out there in San Francisco Aquarium Society virtual meetings. It's nice to sort of see you. Hopefully you can see me and talk to you about bettas. Yes, I've been into bettas for about 30 years now, or a little bit more. I started with one, as everybody starts with just one. You start with one, and then they're so personable, they're so individual, they greet you every day, they follow your fit. They're like little tiny puppies in a jar. They're just wonderful little individual fish. And then you have to get a second one. And then after a while, you get curious about the bubble nesting that they're building. And then they're like, hey, if I got a female, maybe I could breed them. And you get into it. And then all your friends get really tired of you talking to them about it. So you find the local hobby group and you say, people I can talk to fish about. Oh my gosh, they understand because they're just like me. So yes, I've been breeding, raising fish for about 30 years. I've gone ahead and in the California Betta Society, we have also gone ahead and held 2 shows a year for a very long time. And we put on these shows and we get fish shipped out to us from everywhere and we judge them and by the International Betta Congress rules. I've also been the chairperson for the chair of the judging board for a while, for about 4 years, 5 years, 4 years, in the IBC, which also meant that I did a lot of work on the standards and I traveled a lot. The shawl behind me is from Victoria Betta. They went ahead and gave that to me when I was in Australia. I've also been to Thailand, to Germany, to Switzerland, to Brazil, and to Mexico, as well as Canada and the US, judging shows and training new apprentices. So that's...
Wow, who would have thought that one betta would have taken you all around the world, huh?
Oh, I know. One betta leads to a lifetime.
Quite a bit. So from what I understand today, you've got a PowerPoint presentation and or a slide presentation, which it is right there in front of us.
Right there.
So just as a reminder, everyone, you can put any questions in the chat, and I'll try to sneak them in with Larissa, and I think she's giving the thumbs up on that. So if not, we'll see if we can take some Q&As right at the end. So I hope that. So looking forward to your questions, everybody.
Okay. So today we're going to be just doing an overview of the betta basics, because I've done ones on breeding, I've done ones on judging, I've done a lot on judging, but I want to just. Everybody's interested in the bettas overall. There's so many of them. They're so diverse. One of the most common questions we get in CBS is, what type of betta do I have? And the basic answer is, you have a beautiful betta. Everyone is individual, everyone's personable, and they're all betta splendens at the basics. I'm going to be presenting almost all the photos in here are photos by Kenny Siwa and Casey Clark. So both of them gave me permission to use their photos in this presentation. So they've got as much as we love our bettas, they're really hard to photograph. So these two people have some beautiful photos of their bettas. And so I really appreciate being able to use these in our slides work today. So this is a betta. This is a beautiful betta. He's a full red solid half moon betta, almost perfectly proportioned, gorgeous red betta. This is a betta. This is a steel blue, metallic blue actually, show plakat betta. Also almost beautiful, perfect by show standards. A couple form and finish faults, but that's by show standards. You love these bettas? These are both bettas. This is a betta. It's colorful. It's bouncy. It's sitting there going boing boing. What are all these colors doing in there? This is a betta. This doesn't look much like the other two, but this is also a betta. This is a betta. This is a betta. Bettas. Bettas. And more bettas. Every one of these are bettas. They're all betta splendens. The best comparison is sort of like the bettas are the dogs of the fish world. They started off from wolves, and then people said, I want to breed something that is very different. So everybody started breeding them, and they started looking at them. Way back when, literally hundreds of years ago, betta splendens come from Thailand and Indonesia in sort of this very still water back there. And over in that one corner is sort of the very basics of what the original betta splendens that got pulled out of the wild is sort of like. They are red, they're blue, they are sort of flashy, they're sort of cool, they build their nests and they defend them. The male builds the nest, the females swim around beyond them. They are also puddle jumpers because their water, it's tsunami season and the waters come ebb and go. So they sort of are always, if one set of water recedes down, they hop to find another one. So watch out and cover your tanks. And this is the most, when you look it up, you'll say bettas have been being bred for over 150 years. It's much longer than that. If you talk to people in Thailand and Indonesia, they've been breeding a lot longer than that. We just don't have good records of the times before 150 years ago. About 150 years is when they started first popping up in the Western histories and being recorded. In the early 1920s, the King of Siam, which is Thailand, went ahead and gave one of the show bettas away to a Westerner who brought it back and said, look at this fish. And that's how they sort of spread out from there. I call them the designer bettas. They are ornamentals. And even what we call betta splendens, and the reason there's a question mark on that is they've been bred for a couple hundred years, but they're not just one species. The show bettas that we have in the world today have actually been bred with other wild betta species types. So the wild betta splendens was also bred with Mahakai, Embellus, Smeradina. They can crossbreed. Not all of the offspring are viable, but enough are viable to then go ahead and merge it in and bring out new ones. We had, what was it, 20 years ago, a explosion of metallic colors. And we'd never had metallic colors in the show world before, the coppers, the platinums, the really gorgeous shine. That was because somebody went ahead and brought back in another cross with Smeradinas again, and probably Embellus and Mahakai, some of the original crosses. But they were specifically going after, we want to see this metallic coloration in the show world. And they were able to bring that trait over from the wild species into the show lines. So the show bettas that we call betta splendens today are not pure wild betta splendens. They never have been, really. And it's a little bit controversial, but I'm not entirely sure that there is such a thing as a real wild splendid in the wild anymore, because all the breeders and all the typhoons and everything out there, their bred fish get released back into the wild again, and they interbreed. So a little bit of a debate there, but as you can see, there's quite a bit of a difference. More recently, if people have been paying attention to what's going on, that fish right there might look a little bit familiar. It's not familiar. This is a Betta stictos male. He's another he's another strain of wild type Bettas. And what came out is this is an alien, what is called an alien. People started saying, you know, we love these wild traits and we're going to go ahead and work with them. So they took the stictos, they took the mahakai, they took the smaragdinas, they took the umbellas, and they probably took a bit of the splendens, and they made aliens. They worked on this for years. And the original breeders of the alien species won't actually tell you what the actual mix was, but I know there was a high percentage of, they literally line bred this for years and years to try and get this from the original stictos plus mixing in with the other wild types to create this very stable strain of alien. So these are not Betta splendens, but they are related to Betta splendens, and they probably have a bit of mix in there, but it shows what sort of work that people can do when they're line breeding and trying to say, hey, I'm working for a specific type. People wanted a Labradoodle. Somebody bred it in, and now we've got Labradoodles in the dog world. Not
So,
all of them have.
I'm just jumping in. So officially, these are not Betta splendens. These are Betta stictos then. Like they would be classified as that, or would they have some splendens in there and so hence they still get considered? I was wondering.
In the show world, they are stuck somewhere in the wild species line, but the people who breed wild species object to that strongly, because the people who breed the wild strains are generally, it's very close to like killifish, where they're trying for species preservation. So they don't like aliens being in the optional section for wild bettas. They're like, that's not what we're about for blind breeding. So they'll probably be moved in the show world over to show bettas aliens. And whether they're Betta splendens or not, they are not Betta splendens. Their base is almost definitely a Betta stictos. You can back there again. That's a Betta stictos. They are the original breeders don't say what they originally bred aliens from, but we're fairly certain the stictos is in it. But because they don't say, we don't know for certain, and they're not splendens, but they're definitely of the Betta line. So yeah, they're show bettas. They're designer showfish. That's one of the things about the Betta world. You can't get hung up in classifications as to what exactly everything is. Like I said, splendens itself is sort of an arbitrary. That was the base of where it came from. What show bettas are now is not splendens, as splendens came from the wild in. Their designer genes and their mutations and their people. People say, we want something and we're going to go after it. Originally, well, not originally, way back when they were from that wild line. And one of the things that they were doing when they were developing it, like corn was a grain once upon a time. And then the people who were breeding corn said, we want the grains to be larger and we want the stalks to be bigger. People said, we want the fish to be pretty and we want the fins to be longer. So they started breeding the fish out to what you see there. Well, I'm seeing it on my left. I'm not sure if you're seeing on the left or right, but what we call the veil tail. It's the long, long flowing fin, but it's sort of tightly contained, and they're closer to the body. It's not spread out, but they're long and flowing. And that's what the king of Siam gave to his friend who brought it out into the rest of the world, was the longfin veiltail. And then some people decided, we want to work on going ahead and spreading that out. What would this be like if the fins were like bigger, if they weren't so close in? So on the right side there, we have what's called a delta tail. Delta tail was what was an intermediate between the half moon, as people were going ahead and working towards getting a full circle effect. But you know what? Delta tails are gorgeous. Veil tails are gorgeous. Half moons are gorgeous. These are all just, people had an idea and they bred towards it. What's in a name? Speaking of the variety of them, we have veil tails, we've got deltas, half moons, crown tails, double tails, short fin, placotte. Most of these are very descriptive names. They just sort of tell you what the basics of, in very straightforward nomenclature, so that anybody can go ahead and do it. In the IBC world of showing standards, we do this also so that we can classify them and we can judge them. You will notice a tendency in the IBC show world to concentrate a great deal on the solids, to get a solid blue, a solid white, a solid red. And that's because with all this color mixing, it's very hard to actually breed solids. And then two, solids are a little bit easier to lay down rules for and to get judgments of color fault. For colors, we tend to stay with patterns. If they're a butterfly, a grizzle, a bicolor, a multicolor, in the show world, you have to have a fault system to be equal and fair, and you have to say, this is the ideal standard, and this is where it goes to. In the show world, we have it divided by three. We're judging by overall condition of the betta. We're judging by the form of the betta, the tails, and what its type is. And then we're judging by the color. So those three in the show world, we balance out. That's the show world. Then there's I'm a hobbyist and I want to have a fish that I want to keep on my desk and is beautiful and colorful and lovely because he's so cute and I want him. 9/10 of the people you'll talk to start off with a multicolor because they're looking through the fish world and something flashes by and they go, ooh, and they go grab. And so I almost always start with a multicolor. The patterns, the brightness, the contrasts, all in a fish. And they're like, I wasn't expecting this. A poodle. Well, okay. In the dog world, whatever catches your attention the first, the personable ones, the ones that jump out you. But most of the people that people keep as pets, they love their dogs, but they're not show dogs. And that's a lot of what happens here in the betta world as well. There's a ton of bettas out there that are not quite show ready. And to that effect as well, we get a lot of trade names because people are looking to try to define what their particular color pattern is, what their particular sort of fish is. Dragon, koi, Dalmatian, alien. What is this? So people constantly invent new names. And some of them eventually get brought into the show world and adopted. Crown tail was not an original tail type. And then it became, over the years, it was solidified, it was solid, it was bred. We're like, okay, crown tail is a stable type. We're bringing this into the show world now and we're designing standards for it. Metallics were brought into the show world. Grizzles were brought into the show world. We've even brought koi into the dragons. Actually are a sort of they actually fit under bicolor or solid, but we're starting to bring dragon in because that's very standard. But we don't worry too much about what the fish name is. If it's a name that somebody's selling it by, if you like it, if it's gorgeous, it's pretty, if it's the fish you want, it's a betta. It's your fish. don't worry about the exact what it's called. It's a show betta. It's your pet. It's going to be a wonderful, beautiful fish. So I'm going to talk a little bit more, but instead of looking at the slide, we're going to look at pretty fish.
Well, that's never bad. Well, I mean, gorgeous photography, of fish.
There we go. All right. So copper bettas, the metallic one, the veil tails, the new explosion of colors. A lot of the diversity of bettas we've been seeing lately has sprung up in the last 20 years, partially because people have started talking to each other and they've really started saying, hey, this is possible. Bettas are actually relatively prone to mutation. This might be a little bit of design by accident. People have been promoting the mutation so much that bettas will have it. Some of the mutations we keep and incorporate into our design work, like the large pectorals were an original mutation. And then people said, hey, this is an interesting mutation. Let's work on it. The IBC sat back and watched that one for a while because we wanted to say, are the bettas going to be able to swim with those extra large pectorals? Is it going to be detrimental to the fish or not? So we watched and waited and said, you know what? They can swim with them just fine. They're fine with them. This does not affect the large pectorals. So we brought them into the show world. On the other hand, the mutations like when a fin, the three pectorals instead of, three ventrals instead of two ventrals, and every now and again the tail splits weirdly. We're like, okay, some of those mutations we don't necessarily want. The rosetail tail mutation, you'll still see that floating around. It's not a mutation the IBC approves of because it's actually detrimental to the long-term effects of a betta. It looks really pretty when they're young, and then when they grow, they just cannot live with their tails that cramped up and tight, mostly. Every now and again, you'll find some ones that can. But have any questions come in?
I am looking here, and let's see. I just saw shoot which one, but then that's the only question I've seen so far. But it seems like a lot of people have been saying, "Hey, Larissa." And it looks like we pulled in some of the people, maybe from the Betta Society. So it's great to have you all. But yeah, definitely any members, if you have any questions about any of the bettas that you see, and I'm still kind of learning some of the terminology, and I probably could do more research and looking, but since I have somebody here, like the ones that are kind of like spiky tailed, those are the crown
those
tails?
are the crown tails.
Okay.
There is sometimes a little bit of a technical difference. If they're the really deep in, they're crown tails. If they're just in a little tiny bit, they're comb tail. But that is such a small distinction that outside of the general world, who cares? Generally, though, yeah, the spiky ones we call crown tails. And actually, when I was over in Thailand, I picked up some crown tail guppies. I was like, oh my God, they developed guppies into crown tail guppies. I was like, oh, that's so exciting. Now, some people like the new mutations. Some people do not like the mutations. Some people think crown tails are the ugliest thing ever. They're like, why would anybody do that to their tails? Some people love them. That's just kind of natural. Right. People like different things.
But that's true. We got a question in. Edmund asks, are there any mutations that affect the overall size or shape of the betta?
Yes, actually. You'll see on the market giants. Giants are a mutation. They are not, some people suggest that they're a result of selective breeding, a large betta to a large betta. That's not true. If you just take a normal show betta and you breed a large one to a large one, you will not get a giant. A giant is an actual mutation. and it is a good full inch larger at a minimum, and they get even more larger. We usually show fish in little jars that are about 3 inches wide to give them enough room to swim around, turn around, see the fish next to them. That's not long-term living condition. That's just the show ones. Giants won't fit in those. We have to take giants and put them into little critter keepers to show them, because giants really are a larger one. Shape of the betta is, that tends to be a little bit more on the line breeding, but there are certain differences, like double tail. The very effect of the mutation that produces the double tail actually works on the spine a little bit at the end, and it shortens their body. So double tails will almost always be a little bit shorter and stubbier than a regular, whether it's a short fin or long fin, doesn't matter. They tend to be a little bit shorter just because their spine, the way it's split off there to make the double tail, shortens them up. We have some mutations that we don't like in the head shapes, like you'll see people talk about spoon heads, and that's a little dip down when the top line of the fish isn't so direct, it curves down a little bit. That's what we call an undesirable one.
Okay.
It doesn't actually affect the betta, though. So, and I've seen some really bad spoon heads, and I've seen some people though that criticize just a little tiny dip, and I'm like, yeah, okay, that's not worth a full set of faults. That's maybe a slight fault. But yeah, we don't generally like the spoon heads. Yeah, that's
Okay, and so we got another follow-up question from Kevin. Is that what's the ideal tank size, and do you really need an air pump? So kind of your betta basics, I guess. Like, what is it going to need?
All right, flowing right into the next slide, because I knew that was going to come up. Oops, come on. There we are. All right, caring for your bettas, because there is, as everybody says, there is a lot of information online, and what you have online doesn't always agree with the other thing. It's actually, it's sort of weird, because you can check 10 different sites, and 10 different sites say entirely a different thing. You check 10 different sites for how to care for your neon tetra, they'll all agree. This is how you care for a neon tetra. You check it for gouramis, they'll mostly say the same thing. Bettas, it's all over the board. And the problem there is bettas are so individualistic, they adapt. They change, and they will work to whatever your situation is, or sometimes they just up and die in your situation. But generally, they will adapt so well to your individual area that they grew up in Thailand and Indonesia, where the temperatures, the air temperature is 86 degrees and super humid. And the whole week I was there, I was sweating buckets the entire time. Then they come out to the United States, which is dry, dry, dry. I knew somebody who was breeding bettas in the desert with 100-degree temperatures outside, and the water temperature never dropped below 95 degrees, and the air was drier than anything. And she had gorgeous bettas. They were wonderful bettas. That's not a temperature range we would ever recommend you breeding them out, but the bettas adapted. They adapted to what her living conditions were like. People also say, don't breed your bettas in 72 degrees. And I'm like, you know what? I've seen some people with beautiful bettas at 72 degrees. We don't really recommend you go down that far. But bettas will adapt to their individual situations. So you'll see information everywhere. Overall, though, think about where they originated from. They originated from Asia in very still waters, in very warm temperatures. And the reason we can keep them in the smaller containers in the first place is because they have what is known as a labyrinth organ. They are air breathers. They literally are air breathers. When you're shipping bettas, a lot of the killifish people and such, you will use breather bags because it's a way to go ahead and get the water all around them and still get their oxygen to them.
Mm.
If you do that to a betta, you're going to go ahead and drown your betta because the betta actually cannot survive underwater. The gill system, it's there, it's present, but it's not their main source of oxygen. Their main source of oxygen is going up to the surface, breathing in a gulp of water and then a gulp of air, and then sending that air through their gill system at that point and absorbing the oxygen into them. So if you deprive them of being able to get to the surface, you're going to drown them.
So it sounds like they don't need an air pump then.
They do not need an air pump for oxygenated water. No, that's not. The general rule of fish, 1 inch of fish per gallon of water, that's actually usually a recommendation for how much oxygen the fish needs dissolved in the water. Bettas grew up in water that never moved at all, so there was no oxygen in the water. So that's how they basically learned to go up to the surface, and that's where they developed the labyrinth organ.
I see.
What you do need the air circulation for, though, water circulation, is to mix the heat around to get the general. If you have a heater in the tank, and most people have a heater in the tank because you don't keep your houses at 80 degrees. If you have a heater in your tank, if you just let it be there in its own, you're going to create one really intense bucket of hot water right around the thermometer, the heater, and really cold water next to the edge of the tank where it meets your refrigerator, air-conditioned room. So a little tiny bit of a bubbler system set with a valve to just go ahead and get some air circulation helps in regulating the heat temperatures of the water. If you have live plants, it also helps the live plants. But no, they do not need an air filter in that regards. Whether you keep them in a jar, a 2-gallon, a 5.5-gallon, 10-gallon or larger, that's all up to you as well. There's a lot of talk right now about you're being mean to your fish if you're keeping it in a jar. That's people ascribing things to your betta that we personally would like. Most of us don't want to live in a closet. We want to live in larger spaces. But if you put somebody into an open space office where there's so much room, they're going to say, "Give me a cubicle, please." People like to define their territories. Bettas like to define their territories. And if you put them in a big, wide open tank, sometimes they're going to look at that and go, "That's too much territory. I can't claim this much territory. I can't defend this much territory. I'm not happy in this big, wide open expanse." I kept a tarantula when I was younger. A friend just up and gave it to me. And he handed me this tarantula, and I said, "Okay, it's in this little tiny critter keeper. Oh my gosh, I'm going to give it a huge tank." The poor thing freaked out and ran and hid, and I didn't see him. And I'm like, "What's going on?" And then I bought a book of tarantulas. This was actually the days before internet, and I just dated myself. But I bought a book on tarantulas and I read it, and it said tarantulas are happier in smaller containers. I was like, "Really?" I put him back in the smaller tanker. The tarantula came out and he started strutting around, and he's like, "Hey, yes, okay, this is my territory. Nothing's going to swoop down and eat me." Bettas can be like that. They're fine in the smaller tanks as long as you keep their water quality clear and you change their water often. They don't like living in their own filth. That's not good for them. So if you change the water regularly, they're perfectly fine in small ones. They can be really good in large ones too. That's an individual. Some bettas will, some bettas won't. Some bettas are happy with tank mates. Some bettas are not happy with tank mates. That we were talking about that earlier. Most of us at one point or another have kept bettas in a community tank, and they get along fine. usually. The problems will be with fin nipper fish like Danios. They'll go, "Ooh, I'm swimming around. Here's this really slow moving fish. Let me go up and nip his fins." Hey, you're like, okay, stop nibbling on his fins. Um, but, and then sometimes I keep bettas and guppies together with no problems usually. I've heard of people who've had their bettas attack the guppies because they mistake the large fins as
Mm.
rivals. And I'm like, hey, okay. That's bettas are so individual that some people really can keep their fish in a larger tank, and then they say, "Oh, that's what it is for all bettas now." You're like, not necessarily. As a general rule, if you're keeping a single betta, we like about a 2-gallon tank. A 2-gallon tank is a nice, stable, good regime. It's a good balance of the water. You don't have to change it a lot. If you're keeping a large breeding array, you're fine with a quart or two. 4 by 4 by 4 or a 6 by 6 by 6 is a good water size, as long as you change it and keep the water clean.
So Michael actually has been asking, and I think he asked, is there a strain that is less aggressive, as he's tried to keep multiple males in a very large tank? Is that possible, or?
You're going to get into the individual thing here. You're also going to get into, let's see. You will see a lot of people who have pictures of a ton of fish raised all together. What's happening in a lot of these photos where you're going to see lots and lots of fish together is these are the spawns as they're growing up together. These fish have been in the same tank from when they were little itty bitty babies, and they've worked out their dominant system as they're popping up to the top. As they're growing, they're going to start getting a little bit more aggressive as they get bigger. You will notice in the long fins that a few males will start to appear with longer fins and bigger fins, and those are the top dog fish. Those are the ones who've made it to the top and said, "I am male." And as soon as you pull those fish and jar them, more males will start to appear. "I am male." And it's not that they weren't male before. They were just like, "I'm not going to fight with this other male, so I'm not going to present as a male yet because I'm just not ready to fight with him." And that'll happen a lot. We also get sex changing bettas from female to male. That happens. It's a documented thing, and it really does happen. But overall, when you see a lot of bettas together, 9 times out of 10, they've been raised together. If you are going to keep bettas in a single tank, large tank together, get a whole lot of plants and a whole lot of decorations, and make sure you have enough room for them to have a territory on their own. I'm not going to recommend it. Almost nobody I know will recommend it, because if you put 2 males in the tank, their instinct, they've also been, one, it's instinct, 2, they've also been breeded. We train them to flare train. We encourage their aggressive sign. We like seeing them in their full out display. We really enjoy, let's see, flare. We like seeing them when their gill plates are out, when they're at full extensions, when they're displaying in full. So even as show breeders, we actually completely encourage this sort of aggression towards each other. We are not encouraging fighting. There are actually another strain of Betta splendens that split out a couple hundred years ago, when way back when they were going ahead and working on when they were working on the strains of Pretobettas with the long flowing fins and the really gorgeous colors and everything. They also went ahead and started saying, "We're going to fight these for money. We're going to say, put them in together and say, who's going to win." And that does happen, like it happens with chickens and happens with dogs. We do not approve of it in the USA. The IBC is officially against this. This is not something that we don't like it, but it does happen. But actually, the strain of Betta splendens that developed the fighter fish don't look like our show splendens at all. They are much thicker bodied, they're stubbier, their fins are very short into their body, and their coloration will be much more like a wild Betta. But they're sort of built like bulldogs, which is actually what a bulldog was originally built for, was for fighting. And that's why it has that big blubber around it and the big thick, so that when they grabbed onto another dog, they couldn't just bite into it. And the fighting bettas are actually like that as well.
Well, I still remember when in the 80s, when I got into the hobby, and in some of my old fish books, right? They weren't called bettas, they were called Siamese fighting fish.
Fighting fish.
Yeah, not probably the most PC term for a fish nowadays, but yeah.
Yeah. We don't like to encourage that name. I will refer to it once in a while just to tell people, the fighting, and they go, oh, but yeah, because college students will be college students, and yeah, we do some rescuing sometimes. No, you don't do that. But so that's why we don't recommend putting 2 males in a tank. It can happen if there's a peaceful set. Color strains are somehow linked to aggression for some weird reason. Reds will be a lot more aggressive in general than blues. Blues tend not to be as aggressive as red. This is on a sliding scale. There's a great deal of overlap here between most aggressive, least aggressive, and then there's the chunk in the middle with an overlap. But that's just sort of a weird thing there. Reds are more aggressive than blues. Weirdly, we're not sure why. But yeah, no. If you do want to keep multiple in the same tank, I would suggest breeding them together and then keeping some of the spawn and making sure they have lots and lots of hiding space and places to get away from each other. A lot of people will keep their females in what's called a sorority tank because the females tend to be less aggressive than the males. And they don't have the long flowing fins that the long fin males do. But you know what? They've still got the coloration, they've still got the attitude, they've still got the prettiness. They also still have a pecking order, and they still have a little bit of aggression. So some people's sororities will be fine, and then one day, all of a sudden, half your fish are dead, and you're like, what happened? And it's somebody decided to go up in the ranks, and then all of a sudden you had territory redistribution and fighting. And you're like, okay. So you can do it, but be careful about it.
And so we have a question from Jennifer who asked about how do they create koi bettas? A number of your pictures are beautiful koi bettas. How did they come up with those?
Yeah, Casey in particular loves photography in the koi bettas. She adores koi, so a lot of my photos that are prism bettas in particular are koi. So the coloration of the bettas has always been blue-red as the base, and then they started branching out with more colors. In the show world, it's really hard to judge a multicolor. So we didn't do a lot. Speaking of a sort of a traditional one just sort of flashed up there. So we didn't do a lot of the mixing of the colors other than the multicolor in the show world because it was really, really hard to judge them. A long time, about in the late 70s, early 80s, along popped out a gene mutation that we ended up naming the marble gene. And what the marble gene did is it sort of reduced fade in certain spots on a betta. So the color would, if like a marble granite copper tabletop is what the marble is designed after, marble to stone, sort of patchwork effect color there. And that ended up being sort of the springboard to a whole bunch of different types of colors. And then people started mixing them. The actual koi bettas with the very distinct color patterns, I'm not actually quite sure how that happened. I suspect in a great deal that it was due to another mutation that popped out. Somebody said, hey, this is beautiful, and I'm going to start line breeding it. And they just started concentrating a lot on the multiple colors and the really cross pattern colors, because they sell well. They're flashy, they're gorgeous, they're lovely fish, and so people just started concentrating on breeding them. If you concentrate on line breeding a mutation, more and more of these types of things will happen.
So when you say line breeding, is it like, okay, I just found this baby fish, it's like, oh, I love it, then I'm going to breed it to something that kind of resembles it, and then we just got to keep selecting down the line?
Yeah, usually in a betta world, when you breed your fish, you will have somewhere between, on the small end, 20 up to 3 to 400 babies. They lay a lot of eggs, and some fish are very good about fertilizing all those eggs and taking care of them and hatching them. So when you have a mutation pop up, it's not always just within one fish. Sometimes it'll be just a single fish. Sometimes it'll be in like 10 of those 400 fish. And you sort of look around, okay, I've got this one fish with this cool mutation. Let me see if any of his siblings have the similar one. And then you breed it back to its mother or dad. If you breed it to its mom or dad to try and say, okay, where did this come from? If you've got two of them, you breed them to each other. There is something about, if you inbreed too much, you will produce weaknesses. Bettas have been inbred for hundreds of years. As long as you don't go beyond 3 or 4 generations of inbreeding, it's usually not a problem. Bettas have been crossed out, they've been brought in, they've been crossed out, they've been brought in so often that a little bit of inbreeding to try and stabilize a mutation is perfectly fine. Next generation down, you can go cousins to cousins. You can go ahead and then do second cousins to try and stabilize that trait. What I actually meant by line breeding, though, is to get something like that white, you have to know 5 or 6 generations. You can't just throw 2 bettas in and get a perfectly solid fish, because the tendency of multicolor is actually greater than solid. If you throw 2 random fish together, you'll always get multicolors and sort of muddy colors and a variety. You will almost never get a solid fish. So line breeding is you bred their parents, you bred their grandparents, you bred their great grandparents. You have records of this breeding for 10 years. You know what's in this line.
I see. And
That's
yeah, like we've gotten some questions about breeding, and I've been looking through too. So like Helena was also asking about glow betas. Like, is that a mutation, or did they just kind of introduce a gene in there to make them glow? In the black light, I'm guessing.
Yes, no, actually, glow lights is another very controversial sort of subject, because they are actually copyrighted, and you are not allowed to, when you purchase a glow beta, you are actually signing a contract with the company that owns glow betas that says, I am not going to breed or sell these fish. Technically, you could breed them, but you would never be able to sell them. Then you'd be left with 400 glow bettas sitting in your room because you're not ever allowed to. They went ahead and they did the direct, they introduced genes. They did a direct manipulation fiddling with their interior gene work by injecting a particular strain from another type of fish. I think if you go to their website, they might explain it more. Bettas are not the only fish that they've got glowfish on. But yeah, no, they they developed them in a laboratory, which is actually, honestly, It's a byproduct of something that was actually very useful. This sort of started off in, were they Danios? I think Danios were developed in the mid 80s, early 90s to be able to toss into a pond and find out whether the pond had a certain level of contamination. By then it would start glowing if it encountered that.
Mm.
And this was actually a very practical environmental study that people were doing as to try and figure out, hey, is there an easy way for us to figure out where contamination is spreading out here? And they were aiming just for a good fixture. And then somebody said, this is kind of cool. I wonder if I could make a betta do that. Like, but they didn't want to toss them into pollution. And the line of people that developed the glow section, as I said, I believe they have some other fish. They're also glow fish, but what's really taking off is the bettas because people are used to cool, unique, strange bettas. But yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and Jennifer asked that, yeah, is the color black? Is it a mutation, or is it that they combine somehow two colors and they kind of get black?
We're actually going backwards there a little bit on, let's see if I've got, Casey might have a good photo of, at one point we flipped through a picture of there was scales in there and you could see the individual colors onto the scales. And what's basically happening is, okay, this isn't the one specifically I was looking for, but it's a really good sort of an example. Bettas actually have 3 separate layers of coloration.
Mm.
They have in their very, very back end, when they're fish growing up as little itty bitty fry, you'll notice that the fry will either be dark or they'll be light. And that's their base color. They're either going to be light bodied fish or they're going to be dark bodied fish. It's sort of like in the stony opals. There's black opals and there's white opals. This is like the base stone that the other layers are set on top of. So dark bodied, light bodied. A black fish is always going to be a dark bodied fish. And then on top of that, you have the color range. You've got about 6 or 7 base colors that then go on top of the light or the dark. You will see in reds, you'll see light-bodied reds and dark-bodied reds, and they'll look quite different because that red is sitting on top of a different set of colors there. Black is actually one of the colors that comes out. It's a dark bodied, and then on top of the dark body, you've actually got the color black. Black, though, is not a dominant color. It's actually, almost anything will disrupt a black. And then the other thing over the black is, back to this one, on the top edge of the scales there, right over on the edging, you can see yet sort of a shimmer, a glow, a sort of an iridescence on that. Mm-hmm. The very aspect of metallics is that third layer, that top layer. That top layer is an iridescent layer. And like on this blue fish, you've got a dark body underneath it. Then you've got sort of blue, but on top of the blue coloration, you've got iridescent. And the iridescent comes in 4 separate colors itself. It used to come in 3, and then they introduced metallics. And metallics are actually using the base colors with a different iridescence color. And the black has to have no iridescence whatsoever. If you get iridescence on top of a black, you get something like this. This alien is actually a black fish. This is a dark-bodied black fish with very, very blue iridescence shimmering over the top. Those aren't necessarily blue. Those are blue iridescence. It might be a little bit of blue as well. They're not always one thing or the other. Let's see. You can sort of see in there.
Wow.
See, even on this individual scale right there, it's two different
Right.
colors. and they're shading down. So up there, there's some black. That's a black coloration there. But it's starting to get some iridescence right over there as well. So the iridescence is not always, it's not one of the fault lines we do have in the IBC for a solid color that's supposed to have iridescence, like the copper, does the iridescence actually cover the fish from head to tail? Because it doesn't always, and that creates color gaps. Here, this is technically they're dragons, but what they are is very heavily. Okay, now dragons are actually an interesting mutation. Dragons are another mutation there of, I don't really want to say, it's not really thicker iridescence layer, but somehow it produced an iridescence layer that looks so thick that you can't see the base colors underneath it. So this fish on top is a black fish. This is a black fish on the top, but its iridescence covering is that dragon scale. And that dragon scale, the normal iridescence layers, you can see through. They just sort of give, like looking at his tail, that's sort of a coppery look. You can see the black underneath it. But his body, you can't see the black underneath him at all. This fish as well. You can only see the blue there, but there's the black. So, yeah, it's kind of fascinating.
Yeah. Dan Brown asked a question about, are there classes of bettas that are being imported in the United States? In other words, like either you have show bettas, and then what if you had good, average? He was kind of describing, like, are there classes of them, or is it just kind of like luck of the draw? They kind of just get sent out.
Is in the show world, we do go ahead and we line breed, we talk to other breeders, we find out what they've been breeding, and we try and introduce strains that will go along with our show. So the IBC, the other thing about the IBC show world is the standards get rewritten, the classes get rewritten every couple of years, and the standards themselves get updated every 10 to 15 years, because bettas are a constantly evolving world. So you know something from 30 years ago, it's not the same thing it is now. So the show world is not stable. The show world adapts to what's out there. We do talk to other breeders. The IBC is international, so we know the other breeders out there, and we try and get what fits in a show line. The people who are breeding over in Thailand, Indonesia, Vietnam, actually Brazil as well, have a leg up on the US American breeders in that their outside water conditions are perfect for raising the fish, because that's where the fish come from. So they go ahead, and a lot of them breed by throwing their fish into giant, huge tubs outside and letting them breed outside with no extra heating, no extra bubblers, no extra ventilation, and a whole ton of mosquito larvae that just naturally is there for them to feed on and snack and grow on. US American breeders have a slight problem in that we have to artificially introduce all of that. So when the breeders over in Thailand, they pick out, they get that, I said there were 400 fish per spawn or more. They get that spawn, and then they go ahead and sort of toss them all out when they get to a certain size onto, it's sort of a thin dip layer that retains a bit of water underneath, but it raises the fish upwards so that you can see them more or less clearly. It doesn't hurt the fish. There's still enough water. The humidity is out there, but they can see them. And they go through these hundreds of fish and go, show quality, not show quality, show quality, not show quality. And they go through and pick all these out, and then they keep a certain percentage of those to raise a little bit further, to start growing out their fins, to start seeing what their conditioning and body is going to be like. The rest of those fish get sent off to the pet stores.
Mm.
Sometimes they'll get put on aquabid, but those fish will be sent off to the pet stores. The pet stores actually have an option of going down when the fish are shipped overseas and into the big fish warehouses. Some pet stores actually literally go down to those fish warehouses when their fish are first dumped off, and they said, I'm going to pick out my individual fish. And they spend several hours picking out which fish they're going to bring back to their fish store. They get some really awesome ones because they pick out, okay, this isn't show quality, but it's the next best thing because these are the siblings of the show quality. And then other stores will just say, send me 100 bettas for this week. Mm-hmm. And they sort of get the remnants of what's left over from that point. So it will range from store to store to store because all of these are siblings of showfish. There's almost no breeding that's done that's not in some way related to the showfish. It's just winnowing down your 400 spawn to what's considered show or not.
Okay. And so someone's asking about, I guess, what we were talking about, what you had just shown about dragon scale bettas. Is it just referring to a thicker scale, or is it a pattern type? Samantha asks, I have seen people debate that there cannot be metallic dragon scales.
Technically, all dragon is metallic. Let's go back to, so what's happening here is, as I was saying earlier, I don't want to use the word thick. It looks thick to our eyes, but it's not literally thick. Somebody was doing an interesting genetic research of actually poking into these fish and going down layer by microscope layer to look at them. And they compared a dragon scale to a regular one. And the dragon scale is on the iridescent layer. It's that third layer up, but it is an opaque, it's a solid iridescent layer compared with what the other iridescent, normally an iridescent layer is see-through. You can see through the iridescence down to the layer below it. Mm-hmm. These all came out of metallic for some weird reason. You will not find a dragon scale that's not out of the metallic coloration, but they all have the dragon mutation, which makes it the thicker appearance. It's not literally thicker, but it has the thicker appearance. However, it's not a show classification because it's not really a pattern. We're starting to make a classification just because everybody says dragon, but realistically, a dragon is either a bicolor because its body is one color and its fins are another color, or it's a solid because it's got the opaque iridescent dragon throughout the fins as well as the body. Most of the time, it actually tends to stop at the body, producing this sort of bicolor effect. But yeah, that's dragon. It's very rare for it to get complete coverage, which is actually why they're getting their own classification in some ways, because they are at a disadvantage in showing in bicolors, because most dragons will come out sort of more like this, where some of the scales are perfect on coverage on the top and not so perfect on the bottom. You can look at that and say it's armor. It's covering the top, but it's not covering their body. And you can, but yeah. Did that help?
Yeah, a lot of people said good explanation. That makes sense. And Dan Brown here asks, so do the really, really good show bettas ever reach the USA?
They do, and actually we breed a lot of them ourselves too. I mean, it's not, one of the best show breeders is Sig Illig. and he lives here in the United States. And it's because he has spent many, many, many years line breeding his fish. If you get a red solid fish from Sig, you know it's a red solid fish. Because the people over in Thailand and Indonesia are also selling commercial, they tend to not as often breed for the solids. They tend to breed more for the colors, and if solid pops up, they're happier with it. There's some differences, like Kenny, who has gone ahead and done a lot of these slides here. Kenny specializes in solid oranges, reds, and yellows. His orange line is a gorgeous, gorgeous orange colors. This is one of Kenny's oranges, but Kenny's from Singapore, but he specializes in line breeding. But yeah, they have, and we talk to each other. Kenny and Stacy for a long time were actually shipping their fish back and forth to each other to sort of stabilize and produce the lines, and to make sure that on both Area 1 and Area 6 there were similar colors. The yellows, I mean, that's a gorgeous yellow. These are Kenny's breeding as well. So we have them here in the US. It just depends on what you're looking for and who's working on them. Over Area 6, they have an advantage over the other areas. I mean, Area 2 is covered in snow half the time. When I went to Area 2's Europe, when I went to Area 2's
Area 6.
sorry, because we can't do worldwide conventions and shows all the time, we divide it up usually by continent and then smaller down from that. So Area 1 is North America, Area 2, Europe, area, and so on. So Area 4 is South America. Area 6 is Southeast Asia. Okay. So it's I tend to start talking IBC. Okay, here's an interesting one. The one thing that absolutely they've got over the United States, crown tails. Crown tails, interestingly enough, cannot be bred very well in the United States, or rather, they can't be raised in the United States. There's something about our water and our keeping them in the conditions which causes those rays to start curling up. Let's see. Okay, now that's one that just got it imported in, but you can also see that there's starting some be crinkles over there. Okay, I had a couple of good pictures here before. You're going to look at those rays. They're starting to curl, they're starting to float. And actually, this is sort of an interesting, cool look. It's sort of a messy crown, if you will, but that would never be accepted in the show world. Outdoor breeding tends to be that. The best crowns I've seen bred in the United States usually tend to be tub bred and with a good outer air area. And Brazil can knock crowns out of the water. Outside of Asia, Brazil has had the next best crowns that I've ever seen. So that's an interesting effect there. But it really depends on, when you say show fish, you're like, which show fish? What types of fish do you particularly want to be looking at? But yeah, we can definitely get them in. It partly depends on what you know, and it partly depends on what you're after. I mean, a lot of us who do the show breeding, we'll do an aqua bid run too. We'll say, hey, okay, breeders over here, send me some of your fish and all. I haven't literally bred for several years, mostly because when you're a judging board chair, you have no time for it whatsoever. And I lost a lot of my original lines. I was breeding blues, grizzle tails, yells, double tails, and I don't have a lot of those anymore. They did not breed before they got too old for it. So I'm going to have to restart my lines. I actually have right now a whole bunch of fish that we had a breeder last year, Pat Henry, and he lived in Southern California, but he passed away last year, leaving his entire fish room. So we got together. Samantha rescued all those fish, and then we divided it up amongst 10 or 12 breeders and sent them. And so I've got his yellow line juveniles that I've grown up, and I'll probably start working with those. But if I didn't have them, I would do an aquabid run to say, hey, what's out there? and with people I know. I'm also into wild breeding because the more you breed, the more you want less high maintenance fish. So I also do chinoides and appy and gladiators and such. So you start getting into the wilds because they're still bettas, but they take a little less care than they show.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, I guess because of the genetics and everything, like, they just definitely with the flowing fins, or and I thought it was interesting what you said about the crown tails, is that so then in the United States, they would start curling gradually, and it's something to do with our water, possibly.
It's probably at least partially the fact that all of our water is required to go through a system of conditioning. But there's a lot of people I know who use RO water, and it doesn't. I'm not. There are people in the United States who breed crowns and can have some good crowns, but they're far and away the exception to the rule. A lot of us love the crowns, but we found that we could not. We can keep them, we can breed them, but yeah, there's something about our water. I think it's less the actual water than the I was talking at one point. Let's see, back to the slide sets.
Temperature.
Are we getting that to our edge? Oh, we're past our time actually. But oops. Oh, come on. Back to our slideshow. Real quick. So you've got the water, you've got the outside air, you've got to have a covered top, minimal water flow, live plants. With the crowns, I actually think it has something to do with the water flow on the inside and the outside air interacting. But I'm not certain about that. Nobody's ever really quantified it down. And the reason I think that is some of the people who bred them have bred them in ponds outside in Milpitas. Oh. And I'm like, they got good crowns. And I'm like, they heated their outdoor pond and they got great fish. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah. And I guess one final question is, Samantha asks, what do you think of salt in betta tanks? Can they be used to prevent parasites?
Salt is usually a overall general good. It's sort of a preventative, and it's good sort of an antibiotic in general, because there's a lot of microorganisms that won't survive well in salt, but bettas do fine in brackish water. Bettas are actually, if you're going to have brackish or non-brackish, bettas tolerate the brackish really well. So a little bit of salt in the tank is actually perfectly fine for a betta, and it will be a nice preventative for a lot of things. If you see a fish starting to get a little bit droopy, a little bit sick, the first thing you do is add a pinch of non-iodized salt. Don't get the general table salt. If you get the general table salt, there's salt with iodine. Iodide, and there's and you want to make sure you get the non-iodized salt. Otherwise, the alternative to table salt is Indian almond leaves. And they have a bit of a property that nobody's ever been able to strictly define, but it's kind of medicinal for that. And it's not just the tannins. Uh, but but yeah, table salts, a little bit of salt in a betta tank is perfectly fine for them. And it will usually help if they're feeling bad because there's little microorganisms that the table salt will kill. The non-iodized salt.
Hmm. And Ryan just stuck in a question about shows and expos. Will there be any in Pennsylvania?
That is totally dependent, actually, on the local clubs. The problem is shows are a lot of work. Oh my gosh, they are so much work. So you need a good, stable crew to be able to set up, receive all these bettas from all over, take out all those literally hundreds of bettas from their bags, stick them into their tanks, run the show, and then bag half those fish back and send them off and auction. And do all that in the time frame of a hotel that you're paying $700, $800 a night for. If you can't get a showroom that's cheaper. So it requires a chapter with a lot of support. Better Bettas, that's the name of the group. Casey's group and Holly's group. They actually just ran a show last weekend that they supposedly had a lot of people coming out to help them, and most of their helpers didn't show up. So it was only a few of them doing all that work. So Pennsylvania, I'm not sure literally about Pennsylvania. I don't know the chapters and the clubs out there. You can inquire with the IBC and ask them if there's local ones close by, and then you can volunteer to help. The best way to have chapter shows in your area is to volunteer with your local chapters and to say, I'm going to pitch in and help because I really want to show. You can also cross borders. I think that's within a driving range of Canada, and Toronto has shows.
Wow. Well, we are at the 1 hour and 60-minute mark, so we are well past our time. Thank you so much today for this great discussion on bettas, and I've learned a lot. I was taking notes, and so I mean, definitely now I'm now already thinking maybe a betta might be showing up in one of my tanks. So
you're like, let me look around, see what you like. There's a betta for everybody. There's not just one betta. There's something out there that you will enjoy. Adopt a betta. Find the one that you like, the one that you enjoy, that speaks to you. Like I said, they're like little puppies, so they've each got their own little personalities. That's why you can keep them individually, and they make great pets. So yeah, I highly encourage people to have a pet betta or two, but do be warned, it has a tendency, one will become many.
Got to have a lot more little containers, and 2 gallons at that, as you were recommending. So thank you so much for taking the time today, Larissa, and for this very enlightening presentation.
And if you've got any questions, you can email me at any time. I'm on the Facebook with the SFAS. California Betta Society is also on the Facebook. Just do search for us, and we can help you outside this presentation as well.
All right. Well, take care, everybody, and we'll see you at the first Friday of next month, hopefully, as we keep our speaker lines going for this year until we can all be together.